the other thing that stood out was that you said that you are now on the other side of the table, right? So you have been to the journey of being a worker to being a leader, and you have now you are as a people's leader. You are actually have slightly more influence when it comes to developing or creating the processes that that develop those leaders. I'm curious, like what are some of the best practices have you picked from your own journey that is helping you becoming a better people leader or for an organization?
Oh, goodness. I think so one of the things that I constantly am coaching others on is when they have a complaint or an idea or a challenge, that it has to be backed up by facts, right? So where's the data? It can't just be a gut feeling. It's got to be supported by some evidence of something. And so I think, and maybe it was probably prior to my consulting career, but it was when you present anything, it has to be fact-based, right? And you know what you do for a living, so absolutely. And so it's thinking about, so if you're trying to craft a story, what is the data to support that story? And we all know we can run any sort of data statistics to prove our story out, but it's being really crisp to say, if you are trying to gain funding for a particular project, what is it going to do? What's the history? Why has there been no funding? What's the return on that investment? How many resources will we need to hire? What is it going to cost? But ultimately, what's the gain for the organization? And so putting all of the pieces in place to really support that from a data perspective, I think is the most important that I've learned, is that you have to have data to support any sort of initiative, challenge, anything that you use within your career to help you be more successful.
And being a people leader, being a chief people officer, I'm curious, like what is from your perspective, what are the anatomy of a good people's leader? Like from what you are seeing, what is your thought on if you're a leader, like you need to show these kind of traits to be a better leader, to build this organization which is people centric and basically creates future leaders.
So I'm going to tell you a secret, and now it won't be a secret because everyone listening will know. Um, there is this, I think, I don't know, it's a stereotype, I think, of HR professionals that we're people. And what I mean by that is that we're this hugely caring, endearing, empathetic group of individuals. And what I would say is not always, right? And so I have met so many different leaders, whether they're in the HR space or just leaders in general. And there's really no stereotype that we exhibit. What I have found is it is super important how we treat people, right? So dignity and respect, paramount. Kindness goes a long way. And one of the things that I coach others is the delivery of their message, right? The tone of voice, the words you use, the situation you choose to have the conversation in, it is so important. You praise in public and you give constructive feedback in private. You allow that person to experience your words, but it is in a way that allows them to learn from it and then stand up and do something differently. And to give constructive feedback in public, that's like, oh, please don't ever do that. That's happened to me early in my career. And I thought, well, why would that leader embarrass me in front of my peers? Because now I actually think horribly of that leader and they've lost my trust. And so thinking, how do I make sure I never do that? And how do I actually help somebody to be better, right? So it might be a minor mistake, but how do I give them feedback in the moment so that they can improve? And so I think the so what is really important, right? I'm giving you this feedback, so what, right? Because I don't want you to make the mistake again, because you're super smart, because someone is going to ask you 3 additional questions, and I want you to be prepared with the answers. And I hope my team would say this of me, but it's about being kind. At the end of the day, when I come home, I want to be able to look myself in the mirror and like what I see and reflect on my day as we all dream about what we did during the day. I don't want it to turn into a nightmare. I want it to be like, okay, well, you know what? I did the best that I could under the circumstances. I treated everybody as best as the situation demanded. And they walked away feeling like a good human being and not belittled by any means. So I think that's a lot of words to say kindness. It's really important.
Interesting. So I think over our conversation with a lot of HR leaders, I think one thing that really stood out as we are coming out of pandemic, that primarily one thing that the leaders have observed over the last couple of years was HR leaders, they had a lot of struggle finding a seat on the table of leadership, making decisions and all that. And I think, and over the last year, pretty much they are the only one who have some answers on how to handle work, what's happening, and they have slightly more perspective, and basically how they were now given the seat to have those conversations, to basically generate that influence that they have been trying to push forever from the cultural context. So I'm curious, what has been your journey as a people leader through this pandemic time?
It's been scary, right? The pandemic has presented us with so many factors that we were ill prepared for, that we never considered. Everyone had always talked about the world of working in an office and being remote. And there was okay, well, we're going to have a telecommute policy. And do we give people equipment and do we fund it? And how often do we want people to be in town? But the world became boundaryless. And all of a sudden, during the pandemic, regardless of where you lived, you actually, if you could maintain the time zone and the workload, you could hire employees anywhere in the globe. And it was a fascinating transition. And so very quickly, the scariness is, okay, well, if you're hiring someone in a state like California or Massachusetts or New York, you better make sure that you understand employment law. If all of a sudden somebody picks up and moves to Wyoming, you have to understand payroll taxes and what does that actually mean. If you're hiring an employee in the European Union or Asia or, Australia, it is really important that you understand, okay, so agreements overseas are not like a US employment offer letter, right? We are at will in the States. You're not at will employment in many countries around the world. And so the knowledge and the technical aptitude of HR leaders went from being important to being essential, right? So you can no longer have an HR head of HR who doesn't have that technical knowledge because it is a boundaryless world. And so as an HR leader, it was quickly like, okay, so how do I surround myself with employment attorneys? How do I expand my network? What research site do I need to go to make sure that I get the law digest on a regular basis? Or who do I hire so that they can be responsible for very specific things? So I think the technical knowledge is probably the first piece. The human element, arguably more important, but a different experience, right? So all of a sudden, we had HR business partners who were coaching people in the past of dealing with work and dealing with personal lives. All of a sudden, it was a true commingle, right? So at any moment, the dog can come in, my kids can come in, my husband can walk by shirtless. Like all of a sudden, it's, here's her personal life. And it's up front and center for everyone to experience and see. And we had to make that okay, right? And the joke of, hey, you're on mute, that's just part of the world now. And as you and I chatted, I said, I'm sorry, but my dog will probably bark during this, but that's normal. That's normal. So these new set of parameters have just become the norm in the last 2 years. And we've had to coach leaders to say, hi, you can no longer be a dinosaur who requires people to come physically into the office. And it's okay if you don't see them, their physical presence, because now it's about their work output. And so if you don't understand what it is that they're doing, that's actually your fault as a leader, right? So how do you get closer to the work? how do you measure the output? How do you engage in a remote setting so that the virtualness is just as good as being present and being able to reach across and like touch someone, right? So I think those behaviors and those coaching mechanisms became really important. And arguably, not a lot of HR leaders left their positions. So there was this hold on chief HR positions where boards and employment organizations may have been unhappy with their HR officers, but because of the pandemic, no one was looking to make any changes, right? And so I would say within the last 6 to 8 months, the world of HR roles has become hot because now we're moving into, well, guess what? This is our future. And maybe it's a hybrid where people are coming back into the office, but we're seeing many more HR leaders actually shift and change, and HR leaders raising their hand and saying, oh my gosh, I'm burnt out and I don't want to do this anymore, right? It's exhausting. We have planned go back to the office, go back home, policies, procedures, costs, funerals, celebrations of life, the world of benefits and negotiating health and welfare on behalf of your team, if you live in the States or in Canada, is just become so much more important. And, I credit the HR professionals that are out there because it's been really tough these last few years. Many of my team members through the course of time, and those I don't even work with anymore, the conversation and the catching up over a glass of wine, there's always a story of a tragedy, right? Where someone, went into the hospital for non-COVID related things, right? And passed away. But now a lot of it's COVID related, and young people and kids who are getting sick, or simply parents who are scared of sending their kids back to school. It is really challenged, I think, all of us as professionals. And personally, early in the pandemic, we came home and my daughter came home. And at that point in time, she was 5th grade. And remember that show, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? I think I failed. I was like, okay, let me think about this math and how am I going to do this? And wait a minute, how are they teaching you how to do this now? And so every day my daughter would like get off of her remote learning, and I would say, okay, so now teach me this. Teach me the math that your teacher just taught you. And I thought, okay, A, I'm going to be smarter, but B, this will also help me appreciate, is she actually learning through a remote setting? So I just credit all the new skills and behaviors that all of us have experienced, whether you're a parent or not. The pandemic has been really challenging.